Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Lots to talk about. Woke up today to a burning Christmas tree. Evidently, the Fox News Christmas tree, the artificial tree that they didn't get a flame retardant tree, which you go, okay. But evidently, the tree ablaze. I guess a homeless guy, they're claiming, possibly. Or no, wait a minute, it was Joe Biden. It was Joe Biden who burnt down the tree in his spare time, of course. But hey, that was the news I woke up to, the burning tree. And immediately my mind went to this place of, is it a sign? Is this a sign of where we are? Is this, if you're buying the Christian nation thing, is this a sign from above? Hey, bad, repent, do something? No, that's not how the Christians took it. No. It's not how the GOP took it. No. It's all Joe Biden's fault. Ronna McDaniel, the RNC head, she said, look at your Christmas tree. That was just burned down. This is a huge problem for Democrats. Because it was the Democrats who burnt down because they hate Christmas. Remember, Democrats hate Christmas, or at least that's what we're led to believe. And yet, oddly enough, I don't know many Democratic representatives or Democrats who pose in front of their Christmas tree with their armed clan, with their AR-15s for the holiday of the birth of Jesus. Just kind of bizarre. The pacifist Jesus. Would Jesus be packing heat today? Would he be walking around sporting an AR-15? I seriously doubt it. But here we are in this moment. And look, Republicans not letting a good crisis go to waste. It's all the Democrats' fault. It's their fault that the tree was burning. And of course, the tree was burning because Republicans are better on the economy, inflation, and crime, according to Ronna McDaniels. And this is the thing that gets me. You'll watch Fox News long enough. It really all is just kind of talking points and regurgitating nonsense. Where if you sit back and you go, wait a second, what are you talking about? How do you how does A get to B? How do you draw that line? Well, they do some mental gymnastics. They do a little, they lie. That's probably the easiest way I can put it. And look, all day, all I saw today, and this is why I have open direct messages, because I love hearing crazy people say crazy stuff. Cons are losing their mind over the burning bush. And as I said, maybe it's a sign. Now, here's what I wish. I wish they would show this kind of passion and anger and this kind of willingness to act over what happened on January 6th. I wish there was this kind of fervor to save democracy, to save our nation from, these people. The folks who are not taking the sign of the burning tree. It's just crazy. And I wish they would take this kind of initiative and helping to fight things that really matter, like figuring out how we stop the virus from transmitting even more, how we stop people from dying. Maybe just a thought. And I know Marjorie Taylor Greene said 600,000 people a year die from cancer, and we don't shut anything down from cancer. But Marjorie, even you have to be smart enough to realize that you can't walk into a room and catch cancer from someone else. Even you have to be that smart. Okay, maybe I give her too much credit. Maybe I've gone too far. I sense I've gone too far on her intelligence. And what's interesting is, I was just watching clips of her before the show, going on about how the January 6th rioters are being treated poorly in prison. And how their race is being used against them in prison, and how they're being forced to do some really bizarre stuff that's just not true. They're being forced to eat gluten food. And you go, yeah, you're bread and water. Isn't that what prison's supposed to be? Isn't this what your folk were saying about prisons? It's not hard enough. We're making them like country clubs. And now you actually go to jail and see that, hey, it's not the country club you imagined or let yourself believe, that it's actually jail and it's not fun. That now you're going to hear people whining. And I love the fact that she's, every day at 9 p.m., they patriotically say the Pledge of Allegiance after being humiliated and ridiculed. They're traitors. They should be. I hope the people in prison are giving them a hard time. I hope the people who are behind bars are going, man, you really screwed up. This is wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. Just my thought. Now, I wish they would also use some behavior to help us, not have more people dead. For instance, good stuff today. Some good news came out. We've hit the 2 million vaccinated number. That's pretty impressive. Now we're not anywhere near where we need to be, but 200 million is a good number. Now here's the thing. The number of new cases here in the U.S. are going up. In fact, they've gone up from a 95,000 new cases a day on November 22nd to almost 119,000 a week this week. Hospitalizations they say are up 25% more than a month ago. These are all because of the Delta variant. They're saying Omicron coming, but the vast majority is Delta. But Omicron's in 20 states now. At first it was California. They won. They got it first. Now within a couple of days, we're in 20 states. Deaths are climbing, are ticking up again, on average of 1,600 every day. We're on track. We're in the matter of next day or so going to hit 800,000 dead from this. And you go, well, they would have died from something anyway. I don't know. That's one of those things where I'm not that morbid. I would like to believe that they'd have had more time and less expense for we the taxpayers and folks who work in hospitals, less trauma for them. And this is where we get into this weird world, because our government is not going to be effective in dealing with this. And I've said for a while, the reality is capitalism is going to have to figure this out. There's going to have to be, carrots and sticks along the way, because our court system's screwed up. Our political system is screwed up. We're in polar opposite camps. Today, for instance, the Senate rejected Biden's vaccine mandate 52-48. You had Manchin and Montana Senator John Tester vote with all 50 Republicans. So there you had a 52-48 repudiation of the mandate. Now, it's not going to pass the House. It's not going to become law. And if they did pass the House, Biden would veto it. But it's hung up in the courts, so it's probably not going to go into effect. And if it does, it's probably not going to happen until after we've had to live through the worst part of what's coming. Because look, everyone who studies this stuff. And I have a listener, a really bright guy, who sends me his predictions for the next couple of months. It's going to get bad. It's going to get bad again. It is what it is. It's the time of year when people get sick and we go indoors and we breathe around people and we do the things we do. It's going to happen because I think most people have gone, oh, well, we're going to move on and we're going to go and we're going to head through it. And that's going to mean more people are going to get sick, more people are going to die. That's going to happen. Whether it's you, whether it's me, depends on how we're going to navigate this. And how employers are going to do it and how capitalism is going to respond. Because government can't seem to do it. We're not going to send out, squads of people to vaccinate. Folks, hold them down and jab them with the needle. We're not going to do that. I see places that are offering, $1,000 to get vaccinated. Please just get vaccinated. And as I've said before, I've got a relative who's, losing his mind that his insurance went up $1,500 a year because he refuses to get vaccinated. And they said, look, you get the vaccine, your insurance goes back down. This is risk assessment. And, I had a couple people say, well, we should turn them away at the hospitals and we should make them pay their own stuff. And honestly, I'm not in favor of that. It's a knee-jerk thing. You go, yeah, maybe. No, it's not. Because this is that slope. You go, well, what's next? We went through all of your dietary habits for the last 35 years because you used your credit card and that store card that you get your discounts for, and we found you had a Twinkie and a ding dong, and there's red meat here. Sorry, you're not covered. You know that's coming. So for me, capitalism will decide. Insurance rates will go up for those folks. They're going to pay higher premiums, higher deductibles. All of that stuff will be part of how possibly we get through this. But, we're in this moment where, again, our political system seems to be all over the place because Biden's trying to do the right thing. And I give him credit for that. Try and do the right thing. Try and, get people in the way of protecting themselves. And if they refuse to, have a system set up to where you go, well, then you're going to be tested and you're going to have to wear a mask and you're going to have to take precautions, which seems sane and rational. This idea that, hey, if you're not going to protect yourself, well, we're going to protect others from you. That seems rational, seems sane. But what Republicans have done is they've gone, well, if the mandate goes into place, well, and people lose their jobs, they're going to be able to collect unemployment. And look, I'm okay with that. But what about me? What about if I don't want to be around the unvaccinated? What if because I work with a bunch of people who refuse to get vaccinated, what if I don't want to be around them? Do I get to then collect unemployment? Oh, no, because you chose not to go into a dangerous environment. It's kind of crazy on how that double thing goes. But interestingly enough, the next variant coming along, this Omicron, according to the CDC head, so far fairly mild. According to Rochelle Walensky, the director of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, so far limited data, but as far as fairly mild. You're probably going to get through it, especially if you're vaccinated. I know I come back to that, especially if you're vaccinated. Now, there was this big explainer on what's going to happen because the courts have stopped the vaccine mandate. Federal people are going to probably have to comply with it. And that's got folks really unhappy working for the federal government, at least the 4 or 5% that are really the loudest. But in the regular workforce, everything's on hold. Everything's in limbo. And this is not a good place to be, especially as we're walking into the worst months right now. So, as I said, corporations are going to have to decide. And it looks like they are. In places that I've seen, they're raising premiums. They're doing all kinds of stuff because, look, they don't want their workforce to get sick. They don't want to have to shut down their business. It's all about making profit. They don't care about people. Don't get me wrong. They're not benevolent. They're looking at the bottom line. They're looking at the numbers. They're bean counting. And the bean counters are saying, hey, we don't want a wave of sickness through here because it's going to burn up either people's sick time if they have it. It's going to burn up people not coming to work. We're not going to get products out the door. It's bad for business. That's what they care about. They don't care if you get sick. They don't care if you die. They'll just replace you with somebody else if they can find someone. But it's bad for their business. And maybe this is how we get out of this. And I've been saying for a long time, some of us aren't bright enough to get the hint. So interesting enough. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Some good news today. Joe Biden has unveiled the Building a Better America branding. And I've been saying for a while, Democrats have to do a much, much better job of tooting their own horn when they do the right thing. And look, that bipartisan infrastructure bill, the right thing. And look, if you're a Republican and you voted against it, you need to shut the blank up. I don't want to hear a peep from you when something comes into your district. Nothing from you at all. But a new website has been unfurled. The new website, build.gov. It's a hub for governors, for mayors, for business owners, all kinds of working folks to track where that $1 billion of investment is going. You can find out if it's coming into your backyard. Maybe find out if that road out in front of your house is going to eventually get paved because of the infrastructure bill. And the hope is that this money gets out the door quickly. The jobs start happening. We start seeing that snowball effect, and it starts helping to create the jobs that we desperately need. And we need to do it in a big way. And this is where I keep saying Democrats need to start promoting the work that they do and making the people who walked away from us, Republicans, hold them accountable. Now, what I find laughable is you got the Ronna McDaniels of the world saying, no, voters trust us on the economy. No, you're the reason we're in this mess. Republican policy is the reason that we're in the mess that we're in now. They're the reason that we were unable to respond to some things at the very beginning. And understand, we were heading in the wrong direction for a number of years before the pandemic. Inequality didn't just spring up. A minimum wage that hadn't been raised in 12 years, that didn't just happen under Biden. This is stuff that Republicans have been fighting against for years. Now is the time that people are finally paying attention and going, no, wait a minute, on the economy, every person should be looking at Democrats and going, no, do much better on the economy. In fact, I've got some rich friends who say, no, we always do much better under Democrats. They're actually the business-friendly people, because when capitalism works right, when it's regulated, when it's within the bounds of some reason, everyone does better. When you take off the restraints and you allow capitalism to run wild, what you end up with is monopoly. What you end up with is more rich people sucking all of the gains out of the system. Hence, during the pandemic, what'd we get? Well, we got a billionaire class that lined their pockets to the tune of about $2.5 trillion. Wasn't that they were rich enough? No. Had to get that multiple. All at a time when we weren't investing and getting things done. So I think Democrats need to do a much better job. And it's my understanding that this bill.gov, and I suggest taking a look at it. There's some interesting stuff there. This is kind of a way for them to get out and do some sound messaging around moving this country forward. And as I've said a million times, we need this investment desperately. And you go, well, $1 trillion is a lot of money. Well, it is, but it's not. The fact of the matter is, we need this times 4. The American Society of Civil Engineers has been saying for years, we need massive, massive investment. In fact, last time I saw it was like $4.6 trillion that we were going to need to just catch up. So over the next 10 years, we're going to continue to fall behind, even with this level of investment. So while this is good, while this is a step in the right direction, while this is taking us where we need to go, sort of, there's a lot more that needs to be done. And this is where the organizing has to begin for the next round, where we've got to start pushing for better, for more. That simple. Anyway, we got a lot to get to today, a lot to talk about. Gerrymandering. A couple of states playing some games with their maps. I know my state of Pennsylvania is trying. Gonna take a quick break. When we come back, we're gonna have someone here to talk about, just how bad Ohio is screwing up their maps. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1941. That was the day 18 supporters of the Socialist Workers' Party were sentenced in the first Smith Act trial. Earlier that summer, 29 militants had been targeted and arrested for their leadership of the events in Minneapolis during the 1930s. They led the 1934 Teamsters strike that made Minneapolis a union town, successfully confronted the fascist silver shirts in 1938, and led a WPA strike the following year. By 1941, federal agents were raiding SWP offices in Minneapolis and St. Paul, seizing boxes of documents, books, pamphlets, and other materials. The prosecution alleged the 29 had conspired to advocate the violent overthrow of the federal government. The defendants insisted that advocating class struggle to achieve a peaceful transition to socialism was not the equivalent of a violent overthrow. They added the trial was a government witch hunt bent on suppressing their First Amendment rights. 6 were released, another 5 were acquitted, but the remaining 18 were sentenced to between 12 and 16 months in jail. Dozens of CIO unions, including the UAW, the USWA, the URW, and the UE, all rallied to the defense of the convicted militants. The ACLU, central in the defense case, now mounted the appeals campaign. They failed to overturn the convictions, and the 18 surrendered to authorities 2 years later to begin serving their sentences. For historian Donna Haverty-Stack, the case showed how far the Roosevelt administration went to prosecute political dissent, even to the point of targeting the labor liberal left. The act would be repealed in 1952, and hundreds of convictions under the act would finally be reversed as unconstitutional by 1957.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So every time they redraw the maps, I'm always on the outlook for, the most cartoonish, the most bizarre looking. I mean, I don't know that anything's ever going to match the one, the snake on the lake, they were calling it in Cleveland, where at one point it didn't even touch land. It was like the entire top of the state, right along the lake, about an inch deep, where they said, hey, let's figure out how we can take 2 Democratic districts and turn them into one, which is what they did. They ended up getting Dennis Kucinich out of office, which he's now running for mayor of Cleveland, and I wish him luck, because here's the weird thing. When I was a kid, I actually handed out leaflets when he ran for mayor back in the 70s. So the fact that he's still in Cleveland politics and maybe going to end up as mayor once again, interesting kind of turn of events. But here's the thing. Again, the map thing, really bizarre. And this is what happens when you give politicians the ability to choose who their voters are. This should never be in their hands. Have no idea why it is. And that's why Ohio said, hey, we don't want these kind of maps. And here to share some thoughts on what's going on in the state of Ohio, I've asked Katy Shanahan to come talk with us. Katy is the Ohio State Director of All on the Line, their website, allontheline.org. Katy, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick.
So let's get right into it. Ohio is doing some very creative stuff again, even though you guys passed a ballot initiative a couple of years back so we wouldn't be in this place. Or am I missing something?
You're not missing anything. Ohioans actually went to the ballot twice in just the last 6 years in a flat rejection of everything that happened during the 2011 redistricting process, where our maps were drawn behind closed doors in a bunker. There was no real public input. And of course, it landed us with a decade of some of the most gerrymandered maps at both the state legislative and congressional level in the country. And so we went to the ballot in 2015 and in 2018, and we said enough. We want fair maps drawn through a fair and transparent process where there is ample public input and conversation about what our communities need in new fair maps. And unfortunately, the Republicans in the state just sort of shrugged and said, we don't care. We're going to draw our maps again behind closed doors. We are going to curb public engagement as much as possible. We're not going to listen to any of the testimony that you all give about how best to represent your communities. And we ultimately are going to pass maps that are actually even more gerrymandered than the ones that we have now. So we unfortunately are even in a worse place than we were in 2011, despite 2 reforms demanding better.
Yeah, well, because they understand that the voters aren't going to hold them accountable. They know that their voters are never going to vote for the evil other side, because our political system has done a great job of saying the other side's evil. So they're never going to vote the other side, even if they're mad about what their guy did on the gerrymandering. And the other part of this, and this is what I get from Republicans who say, well, they're in control. That's the part of being in control. As long as it's their team that's in control, they're okay with it.
I always push back on that, because the reality is that gerrymandering, no matter who holds the pen, is wrong. Of course, in our system, in a representative democracy, we as voters should have full control over choosing who our politicians are. And even if we would like to hold our elected officials accountable, we can't, because we are essentially shut out of the political process because of our gerrymandered districts. So even those voters who are fed up, myself included, I would love to vote out so many of my representatives, but I'm locked into who represents me because of what my district lines look like. And unfortunately, the Republicans have given us another few years under gerrymandered districts just like that.
Now, what's interesting is, a number of years back, a statewide election, Democrats actually had more votes than the Republicans did here in Pennsylvania. And somehow With the gerrymandered maps they had back then, Republicans controlled 13 of the 18 congressional seats. And you go, how is it that there are 500,000 more Democrats in the state of Pennsylvania? And somehow Republicans were able to figure out how to get 13 of 18 seats in Congress. And you go, well, it's a creative pen.
Well, it's cheating is what it is. We just cut to the chase to say that gerrymandering is a form of cheating that allows you to rig district lines to undercut our ability to fully exercise our right to vote and to actually have a say in who represents us. And of course, the fallout impacts of that are vast, right? We can't make progress on any number of policies that impact every facet of our lives, not because there isn't public support for those issues, but because we simply are dealing with legislative bodies that just don't actually reflect how Ohioans feel. And the same can be true, obviously, of so many states across the country where, like you're saying, in even instances where one party gains more votes than the other, like with Democrats gaining more votes than Republicans in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, in North Carolina, Republicans, because they control the pen during the redistricting process, rig elections so that they win even more seats than they're winning in votes, which of course is what we're fighting against.
It's crazy. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Katy Shanahan. Katy is the Ohio State Director of All on the Line, their website, allontheline.org, if you want to take a look at that. If you got a question, comment, something you want to throw in on gerrymandering, maybe in your state, give us a call, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. Now, one of the arguments that I get is, well, in Ohio, the voters in Ohio vote overwhelmingly for Republicans on the statewide level, so it doesn't really matter the gerrymandering. You're not Pennsylvania, where Pennsylvania's state row officers generally go to Democrats, even if Republicans had the gerrymandered districts, which, since the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania undid the gerrymandered maps, Democrats then did get the majority because, again, there are more. That's what the power of the vote is. But what do you say to that argument that, well, hey, statewide in Ohio, they're voting for Republicans. They're voting for Republicans in the districts. It's just that you Democrats, you're just not anywhere near the majority.
I've got two answers to that. The first is that Ohio is not actually an overwhelmingly red state. Across the last decade, Republicans have won just 54% of our vote. That's not an overwhelming amount. And yet, despite that fact, they have now gerrymandered themselves into 70% of our state legislative seats, and at the very least, 80% of our congressional seats. So if we were dealing with a proportional seat share where they're actually just getting as many seats as they get in votes, yes, they would still have the majority. None of us have ever argued that Democrats should get unearned majorities, but we should get an actual fighting chance that, reflects how we vote. The other answer to that, though, is that there are, of course, downstream impacts to gerrymandering that, yes, also spill over into statewide elections. When you're dealing with a party that has had a complete lock on power in our state government for the last decade because of gerrymandering, that inherently impacts what type of funding is coming in to political parties, to candidates. It impacts how people feel generally about the political process. There are so many people, not just voters, but also potential candidates who look at the realities in Ohio and say, why would I ever run for office if I know that ultimately, the elections are predetermined because of these gerrymandered lines? So that, of course, has spillover impact to voter turnout levels. It has impact into whether political parties can actually build a bench of candidates to run for office. So while, yes, Republicans have won statewide elections recently, I would not say that we are an overwhelmingly red state. I'd say that we are an overwhelmingly rigged state, and that if you actually balance the scales, that you would see that start to shift.
And the other part of this is, you talked about people running for office. I'm more worried about people voting.
Yes,
I talk to people who are in districts that, their candidate is never going to win. And it's like, well, why do I bother going to the polls and voting when there's never a chance? Which is why I've said I'm not entirely against the idea of gerrymandering. And hear me out before you go jumping off the cliff and go, no, hair on fire. I'm not entirely against the idea if the goal of what's being gerrymandered is competitive districts. If we're looking for 50-50 balance where that's possible and making competitive districts where people are running on ideas, not on pure arithmetic. For me, it's got to come back to the policies. It's got to come back to what people are doing to make lives better. And us believing that our government can do things. So now you can skewer me with, no, we could never do that.
Well, I will just gently push back. Of course, I would never endorse gerrymandering, but what I would suggest is you actually sort of gave away your answer in your remarks by saying that you think it's important to build competitive districts where they exist. We agree. Districts should inherently reflect the voters they're meant to represent. And so if you live in an area of the state that is a swing part of the state where inherently there is about an even divide between Democrats and Republicans, where there are a lot of independent voters that switch one party or the other, of course your district should reflect that fact. Here in Ohio, for example, of course there are parts of the state that are deep red Republican. There are other parts of the state that are deep red blue. Suggesting that those areas should instead be competitive is of course not representative of those areas. There are, however, other areas where there are growing populations, diversifying populations that are starting to trend one way or the other, right? So in suburbs around Columbus, for example, those suburbs, which when I was growing up were all very reliably Republican, are starting to trend Democratic, but they're still relatively competitive seats. The same can be said in the opposite side to areas of the state, for example, like the Mahoning Valley up by Youngstown, that were once bedrock Democratic parts of the state that are starting to trend the other way. The districts should reflect that fact. In fact, the districts should be able to shift one way or the other in a manner that actually reflects how people vote to, like you said, get to that end result where it's actually about policies and where voters' voices ultimately carry the day.
Now, I don't disagree with you on that all, and I'm not advocating for drawing another snake on the leg, because that's just ridiculous. It shouldn't take you a day's drive to service your constituents if you're that representative. Right. But I guess I'm looking for that era, that moment where where things are more competitive and we get back to the purity of politics rather than this gamesmanship. Now, as I understand, there was a legal challenge today. There were some oral arguments on how bad these maps you have in Ohio are. Can you walk me through some of what was going on?
Sure, absolutely. So there are 3 different legal challenges to our new state legislative districts. One that was brought by the Ohio ACLU and the League of Women Voters and the A. Philip Randolph Institute and some other individual plaintiffs. One that was brought by the National Redistricting Action Fund, of which All in the Line is a part, on behalf of 10 Ohio voters. And then the other suit was brought by the Brennan Center and the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, CARE Ohio, which is the Council on American Islamic Relations, and the Ohio Environmental Council. And each of those 3 cases argue essentially the same thing, which is that our maps are unduly favorable to Republicans over Democrats unconstitutionally. So as part of our 2015 reform that changed how we go through the state legislative redistricting process, there is a very clear provision in the Ohio Constitution that not only bans maps that are partisan gerrymandered, that unduly favor one party over the other, but that also require our maps to actually have what's called representational fairness. And what that means is that if you are a party that's only winning about 55% of the vote across the last decade, you should only be occupying about 55% of the seats. That is, that you have a direct proportional share of the seats based on the vote totals that you're getting in recent elections. Obviously, our maps do not actually match up with that proportion. Like I said, Ohio is a state that's voted just 54% Republican across the last decade, and yet nearly 70% of our state legislative seats are going to Republicans. So the bulk of the argument is that these maps are partisan gerrymandered. The other piece, though, is that, of course, they unnecessarily crack apart our communities. They dilute communities of color and their ability, especially, to see real pathways to political power. So the oral arguments before the Supreme Court were today, this morning. For the Republicans, of course, their argument is that rule about anti-partisan gerrymandering is merely aspirational. We weren't required to have gotten there. And, you know, I think I'm not going to delve too into reading the tea leaves, but it seemed like many of the justices were skeptical of that sort of assertion, that there are just provisions in the Constitution that you only have to sort of try to meet, that you don't actually have to meet them, that shall isn't a required term that you've got to live up to. So we now sort of play the waiting game to see not only, of course, whether or not the Supreme Court will actually overturn our maps. Of course, we're hoping that they do. But also, we're in a bit of a time crunch. Of course, we've got an upcoming election in 2022 and filing deadlines for candidates in just a couple of months. So I think the other huge remaining question is how quickly the court will go through this process. And then, so the way that the redistricting process works here in Ohio, if a court overturns the maps actually just go right back to the same authority that drew them in the first place. So they would go right back to the same 7-member politician commission that drew the maps originally back in September. And hopefully this time with very clear instructions from the Supreme Court about how to actually follow our Constitution and to draw fair maps. So that's what happened today at the court. And now, of course, we just play the waiting game. Right.
And this is why Republicans waited till the very last minute to release these maps, and why they delayed as long as they did. In fact, as I understand, as was explained to me, they violated some of the requirements to get to the point where they released it. Again, they know what they're doing. There's no, oh, gee, we didn't know. They knew exactly what they're doing. And I would guarantee, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, that they've already got the next map. If this is shot down, they've already got the next one, which is probably worse than this one.
Perhaps they do. You know, you're right to name that. Not only did our reform measure include rules about who draws the maps and how they have to be drawn, but it also included a timeline of due dates when the final maps were actually required to have been adopted. The commission blew past the first deadline. And actually the second deadline, we got our maps voted on just after midnight, the morning after that final deadline. And the ultimate final maps that got adopted were actually introduced by the Republican Senate president at 10:45 at night, just a little under 2 hours before the final deadline, and not a single member of the public got to testify on our final state legislative maps, which of course is not at all what Ohioans demanded through our reform measures. It's certainly not what our Constitution requires. So, you know, tip to tail, the entire process and the maps, of course, are an insult to our reforms. They're an insult to our Constitution, but you were absolutely right to name that, of course, the Republicans knew exactly what they were doing. They did the same playbook in our congressional process where they kept those maps in the can as long as possible. They curbed real public engagement. They ignored what we had to say anyways, and then they just rushed through partisan gerrymandered maps.
Of course they did, because that's what happens when you have unchecked power and you have an electorate who is not going to hold you accountable, and they know this, which is why it's important for groups like yours to be out there fighting, educating, informing. Katy, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Great talking with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You as well. Katy Shanahan, she is the Ohio State Director of On the Line, allontheline.org, the website. Check out the website. Get involved. Call your representative if you're in Ohio. Scream, holler, carry on. All of that. We should be choosing our politicians, not them, us. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1886. That was the day 38 tradesmen met in Columbus, Ohio, to found the American Federation of Labor. There was an urgent need to form a new national organization for skilled workers. The Knights of Labor had organized workers regardless of skill. They included women and African Americans among their ranks. But they were rocked by a sharp and swift decline that year. There was an anti-labor backlash after the Haymarket incident the previous spring. Many tradesmen were looking to form a different kind of federation than the Knights had offered. Julie Green, author of Pure and Simple Politics, states the new AFL differed from the Knights of Labor on 3 core issues. First, these trade unionists were less concerned with the broad social reforms the Knights promoted. Instead, they wanted to work toward the economic concerns of their members. They didn't like the mixed assemblies the Knights insisted upon, which often included non-workers. Second, the craftsmen hoped for full autonomy of the trade unions within a loose federation. They didn't like the centralized structure of the Knights and the dominant role Terence Powderly played. Finally, they didn't like the jurisdictional subordination the Knights subjected the trade unions to. They elected Samuel Gompers of the Cigar Makers International Union as their first president, who served until his death in 1924. The early AFL reflected many of the Knights' traditions, including industrial unions and socialist politics. They fought for injunction reform and the 8-hour day. Within 15 years, the AFL would grow to represent millions in predominantly white, skilled craft unions that embodied business unionism. In 1935, the demands for industrial organizing would split the House of Labor and the AFL.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I'll tell you, the reality is the gerrymandering that we're seeing in Ohio and all of the shenanigans we're seeing in other states is because Republicans don't fear their voters because they know that they're not going to hold them accountable. They know they're not. The same thing that happened here in Pennsylvania before our Supreme Court stepped in and said, this is ridiculous that in a state like Pennsylvania where 500,000 more voters voted for Democrats, that Republicans got 13 of 18 seats. That's ridiculous. And they went and they changed the maps. This is how things have to get done. Now, here's the problem. Republicans are doing the work. They're using their gerrymandered advantages in states to put roadblocks in front of people. They're doing everything they can do to stop people from voting. They're doing everything they can do to rig the next election before the next vote, which is why Democrats have to step up in the Senate and pass some voting rights bills to overtake those. And here to share some thoughts on how that happens, and his union has called for an end to the filibuster to get some stuff done. I've asked Carl Rosen to come talk with us. Carl is the general president of the United Electrical Radio and Machine Workers of America Union, UE. Carl, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, glad to be here as always, and thanks for highlighting this issue. It's critically important.
So you guys have come out and said, hey, we got to get rid of this filibuster. If we're going to get the John Lewis Act passed through, if we're going to get the Freedom to Vote Act pushed through, it's going to have to happen. We desperately need it to save democracy, and the filibuster is standing in the way. That the argument?
Sure. The Republicans have made it clear. They've repeatedly stopped every attempt to ensure that we can continue to have democracy in this country using a minority of the Senate. They don't have a majority of the Senate, but because of the filibuster, they can stop this from passing. Whether the filibuster is permanently ended or whether the Democratic majority in the Senate simply finds a way to evade the filibuster in this question, we just want to see it get done. In the long run, we'd much rather, we think democracy would be better served to actually have a majority vote in the Senate. We think the history of the filibuster is it's there back from back from the origins of a lot of the
Jim Crow era.
South.
Yeah,
it's Jim Crow, et cetera, and we just don't think it ought to be part of democracy. But the issue right now is we cannot allow the filibuster to stop the protection of democracy in this country. And the Democrats, every one of them, need to stand up, and President Biden needs to give his full-throated support to the idea that they have to evade the filibuster in one form or another in order to pass these two very important bills that are here right now to protect the ability of voters to vote and vote for candidates of the choice, not that candidates are getting to pick the voters of their choice.
For decades, the filibuster has been used to stop what we, the people, want. It's where I say where progress goes to die. The Senate
Right.
is where any progress and any help for the working class of this country goes to die. And I look at something like the PRO Act, which used to be common sense. We want people to be able to vote, to join and form unions. We want the law to be able to help support that. We want to push collective bargaining because it's a good thing, not just for workers, but for society as a whole. We can't even get that pushed through, Carl.
Right. Look, the dirty secret is this. There are corporate Democrats who are happy to have the filibuster because it gives the excuse as to why, oh me, oh my, I can't get this done. I'd like to, but we just can't do it. We need to rip that fig leaf off so that people can see what's really going on here.
Now, what do you say to the person, Carl, goes, okay, let's get rid of the filibuster. Now, even though Joe Manchin and Sinema have said that they won't, Manchin absolutely won't. So a broad-based getting rid of the filibuster is impossible. Yet I believe if the Republicans take the Senate, and in 24, if they get the White House, I think the filibuster's done anyway. So that's an argument for down the road. Is there a way that you see that there can be a niche out, a carve out for voting? Because Manchin has kind of signaled that maybe, possibly, do you see a way to carve out for that?
Sure. My understanding is that there's discussions of numerous ways that they can basically evade the filibuster through one sort of maneuver or another, setting up specific time limits on debate on this issue and this issue alone. Just like, look, other things that used to be part of the filibuster no longer are. This is why we're going through the whole thing with the Reconciliation Act, right? Because they realize that if they literally strangle their ability to pass any budgetary bills at all, they'd end up continually shutting the government down. So they made an exception for that already. They've made exceptions for other things. This is a question of a fundamental question of how democracy operates in this country.
Right.
And to say that a minority is going to be allowed to give cover to thoroughly undemocratic actions taking place in states across the country, aided and abetted by a now thoroughly right-wing corporate-controlled Supreme Court. A lot of our problems are because they had a couple terrible rulings over the last 8 years that gutted the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah, the Shelby decision, sure.
Yeah, all we need to do is, largely this is about restoring what was in the Voting Rights Act that was passed in 1965, one of the most historic pieces of legislation in the country's history, one of our shining moments as a country. And the Supreme Court was allowed to gut it, and now we got to fix it.
No, and this is one of those things, Carl, that I go, this should be something that unites us, not tears us apart. Yet, based on political ideology, we seem to be in different worlds. I'm against the idea of gerrymandering. I wish if there were a way we could gerrymander for even districts, I might be okay with that. But the idea of what's happened, given politicians the ability to choose their voters, I don't think anybody really wants. This should be something that unites us. Making sure that everyone has the right to vote should be something that unites us. And yet it's what's tearing us apart, because the former guy's got everyone on his side believing they stole the election and all of that. And yet we're in this position where we're torn apart. And the only people who are doing anything on voting are the Republicans, and they're making it worse. And I like what you guys said in your press release about gerrymandering. The Republicans have done it. Democrats are doing it. Nobody should do it. You said, regardless of which party is doing it, gerrymandering is terrible for democracy, encourages corruption, and strengthens corporate influence on government. And I couldn't agree more with that sentiment.
Yeah, absolutely. It removes all accountability to the voters. And once they aren't accountable to the voters, who are they going to be accountable? They're going to be accountable to, those who give them money, those who lobby them, et cetera. I don't blame the Democrats for gerrymandering in those few states where they're able to do it, because they've got, control of the legislature and the state house, because they're saying, they're doing it in defense against the Republicans. But of course, the Republicans are saying they're doing it because Democrats are doing it in other places. None of them should be doing it. But we can't expect either party to unilaterally stop doing it. That's not how parties work. What we need is for federal legislation that says nobody can be doing it in any state. And that's one of the things that's being held up by the filibuster right now. No,
it's something we need to deal with. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show with Carl Rosen. Carl's the general president of the United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America Union, UE. Their website, ueunion.org. We'll get links out on social media how you can take a look at that. And I go back to this point that I made earlier, that the reality is I would love to see, competitive districts. But in states like Pennsylvania, where earlier, as I said, a couple of years back, 500,000 more voters voted for Democratic candidates, and yet Republicans controlled 13 of the 18 congressional seats because the state was so badly drawn up and gerrymandered. And fortunately, the courts came and overturned that. This is what's given Republicans the power to put in place some really bad legislation and some really bad things that we've not been able to go back and fix. And it's because of these crimes of the past that the working class of this country has been so badly battered and screwed over, seeing decreased wages, health care benefits going away, retirement security being eviscerated, opportunities for their kids going away. It's almost like we're in a position where, and I talk to a lot of voters like this, Carl, who go, what's the difference? Our vote doesn't seem to matter. Isn't this a moment where we need to make sure that people feel that their vote does matter and restore some accountability in our voting?
Absolutely. That's why this is so critical right now. Part of the game plan of the Republicans and frankly of corporate Democrats is to, dissuade many voters from voting at all. Those who have the least resources in this country, convince them it's not going to do them any good to vote, so you might as well stay home. And we can go back to what we had in the early days with poll taxes and only white men can vote, et cetera, where it was kind of limited to the landed gentry to vote and nobody else. That's where they would like to get to. They don't fundamentally believe in democracy. They believe in power for their class and nobody else.
No, and they'll tell you that they're original intenters. I mean, all of the Federalist Society, I'll tell you, they believe in the original intent of the Constitution, which meant blacks in the fields, 3/5 of a human being, women in the kitchen, pregnant, not being able to vote, and of course all of the stuff that comes back with white land owning males 21 and older being able to vote. You got a question, comment, something on your mind for Carl? Give us a call, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. You got a question for Carl Rosen, General President of UE. Now, here's the other part of this, and me as a union guy, I would love to see the filibuster go the way of the dodo bird so that we can get some comprehensive labor reform. You're watching what's going on at places like Amazon, Starbucks. You're looking at all of these abuses, all of the lies that are being told, all of the harassment, the intimidation. We desperately need something to help the working class of this country to be able to achieve that American dream that my grandparents built as possible and then passed on to their kids. We need something now, Carl.
Absolutely. We need the PRO Act passed, and it's not going to pass while the filibuster's in effect. And again, this is something where, there's been bad court rulings over the years that have eviscerated the ability of workers to organize, in the sense that a company that's willing, an employer that's willing to just break the law can get away with it. And they might pay some measly penalties for it. But meanwhile, they've destroyed the union organizing drive. And we have to put a stop to that. And the only way is through new legislation that restores things that were taken away and actually makes things stronger than they were to begin with.
And now we're seeing a lot of activity. I mean, there's a lot of militancy in the labor community happening right now. And I think that's a good thing. It's about time. We've needed it for a very long time. Are you optimistic that this is going to continue? Do you see this as a flash? How are you looking into the next couple of months? Because look, we went through Striketober, we went through Strikesgiving, we're now in Strikesmas. Do we see Strikeawary coming in January? Do you see this continuing?
I do, and it's driven by workers are fed up, number one, and number two, they know that employers are having a hard time hiring people. There's nobody to take their job away from them if they strike in the same way. I mean, Kellogg is saying we're going to hire permanent replacements, but industry analysts are already saying they're dubious that they'll be able to. And so the Kellogg workers are staying out. They voted to keep striking because they want to get rid of the two-tier system, because they know it is wrong for two people to be doing the same job next to each other and one's getting paid more than the other. It's just fundamentally wrong, and is a way of dividing the working class and weakening the union and strengthening the corporation. And it's morally wrong too that somebody should be making less. So that this is a great thing that's happening. We're still seeing it all over. Our union, in alliance with Democratic Socialists of America, set up the Emergency Worker Organizing Committee, still going strong. We started that at the beginning of the pandemic for workers who are just fed up at their workplace. There's no union on site. They just want to know what they can do to demand that their boss treat them better. Sometimes it turns into organizing drives. Sometimes it doesn't, but there's hundreds and hundreds of volunteers around the country through EWOC that can help them. It's a great great thing, and we're still seeing all kinds of interest.
No, and the more workers understand that they have rights and that they have power collectively, the better off I think people are going to be. There was for a while there was this sense of hopelessness, that whole idea. I'm just happy to have a job. And now you've got people who lived through the pandemic, who were told they were essential, they were heroes, patriotic, and they're tired of getting smacked around and cheated. And I think it's about damn time.
Right. And success breeds success on this too. People see other workers striking and winning, see other workers organizing and winning. It makes them more interested in doing it. Who wants to join a union when unions aren't doing anything? What's the point of that?
Yeah.
I mean, and we've been saying this for years. I mean, that's why we did part of what led to the Republic Windows and Doors occupation 13 years ago in 2008, which one can argue led to the Chicago Teachers Union getting new leadership and being very militant, which led to their big strike in Chicago, which then led to the other big strikes across, several other states by teachers in Virginia and Arizona and other places. And all of this is kind of built and built and built till we got to here. What also, fed through there was Occupy Wall Street and what happened in other cities off of that, the Fight for 15, the demand to end income and wealth inequality. All of these things are building off of each other and restoring militancy and hope and possibility to the working class.
Yeah. But here's the thing. It shouldn't have to be this difficult. I mean, the reality is you look at what's going on down at Amazon in Bessemer, Alabama. Shouldn't be that difficult. Should not be able to have these companies get away with this kind of criming. At some point, it's got to be a little bit easier. There's one thing being militant, but there's another thing walking into what has been a slaughter in some of these instances.
That's right. I mean, the deck is fully stacked in the employer's favor. You need a great combination of factors and a really strong organizing drive, strong organizing committee, a lot of undercover work done before you go public, all kinds of things. It take years, all kinds of resources. It shouldn't be needed, but that's what you have to have. If you have that, you can organize and win. And we've been doing it. We're organizing lots of folks across the country. But you're right. It shouldn't be near that hard. We should be able to be organizing workers by the millions right now instead of by the thousands.
And this is where I call on my Republican friends. Look, being a union member used to be a bipartisan thing. There were union-friendly Republicans for years who stood up for union rights and union wages and health care and retirement security. They've gone away. It would be nice if we found some Republicans to say, hey, no, we want to make sure that people have the right to join and form unions, to be able to support their families. That would be nice. I don't think it's coming back anytime soon, but it would be something nice.
It'll come back when the working class causes enough disruption that the capitalist class decides, you know what, maybe we better try to find a way to sue for peace. And that's what happened in the 1930s, and that's why unions got legalized and grew at that point. And we're really, and then it happened with public sector workers in the 1960s into 70s when it was illegal to have unions and illegal to strike, and they did it anyway. And then all of a sudden the laws got changed. Yep. We're going to have to force that again through action from the grassroots.
There you go. Good stuff. Carl, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Carl Rosen, he is the general president of UE, United Electrical Radio and Machine Workers Union of America, ueunion.org, the website. Make sure you check it out. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1993. That was the day that President Bill Clinton signed the North American Free Trade Agreement into law. The stated aim of NAFTA was to increase trade between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. It created the largest free trade zone in the world up until that time. President Clinton declared that NAFTA would promote more growth, more equality, better preservation of the environment, and a greater possibility for world peace. Many NAFTA supporters thought that the agreement would create hundreds of thousands of new high-wage U.S. jobs. They also claimed the agreement would raise living standards in the U.S., Mexico, and in Canada. Yet many in the labor movement were deeply skeptical of these claims. Labor organized against the bill, but despite the protests, Congress voted to pass the Free Trade Agreement. In 2014, the 20th anniversary of NAFTA, the AFL-CIO released a report detailing the harmful impact of the trade agreement. It noted some alarming facts, stating, while the overall volume of trade within North America due to NAFTA has increased and corporate profits have skyrocketed, wages have remained stagnant in all three countries. It also found that productivity has increased, but workers' share of these gains has decreased steadily, along with unionization rates. Current data clearly shows the damage caused by NAFTA. Nevertheless, President Obama and many in Congress have pushed for the passage of a similar trade agreement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This agreement would simply expand the negative impacts of NAFTA. The TPP would lead to even lower wages and continued job loss. This agreement expands special protections for firms that send U.S. jobs out of the country. It is another in a long list of trade deals that have and will continue to hurt working people.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So some good stuff. Look, the reality is we're going to start investing in some infrastructure. I'm happy about that. Build.gov, the website they're going to be throwing out there to find out what's being built. I think there's a lot of good coming around. Maybe reclaiming some of our roads and bridges and undoing some of the horrible of the past, 40, 50 years of privatization. And that's why I've asked Donald Cohen to come talk with us. Donald has written the book, The Privatization of Everything, How the Plunder of Public Goods Transformed America and How We Can Fight Back. Donald, thanks for taking time for us.
No, thanks for having me, Rick.
So we're privatizing everything. This is something that I've been screaming about for years. The idea of the commons, the public good, have just been ripped out of our discussions, and it's been all about profit. It's all about who can make a buck off of everything that we have. And I'm glad we're finally waking up to the moment that things aren't all what they were sold to us to be.
Well, that's absolutely true. As you were just referring to before this, so there's been a 40, 50-year attack on government. Both the idea of public and government and the institution. And one of the key approaches to, in terms of the institution is to sell it off, to privatize roads and bridges, prisons and water systems and schools. And, you can just go down the list.
Now, one of the things that I over the years have been, most concerned about is, we've sold off our parking systems, we've sold off our water systems, and the things that they promised us, the wonderful services and the cheap prices, none of that ever seems to come to fruition. What does come to fruition are big profits and big handouts to the very wealthy, and yet those of us at the bottom keep getting screwed over. You would think at some point we would wake up as a society. Are we at that point yet?
Well, we're not completely at that point, but there are some hopeful signs. I mean, I think people realize, just in the context of COVID, people realize, okay, we need pharmaceutical companies to make the vaccines, okay, but they're making far too much money, and they still control the patents, so they get to control who gets it and who doesn't get it. And it's particularly important, since this is a global crisis. So I think, people are starting to get that. We're still in the haze of, free market good, but government bad. We're still sort of in that environment, and we've got to chip away at that.
Yeah.
But, even the Build Back Better bill, something's going to pass. And, there's sort of this understanding that we need government to deal with child care, and then the infrastructure bill passed. We need government to rebuild America. So, there's battle going on.
Yeah, look, I don't want government doing everything. I don't want them making tennis shoes and T-shirts and cars and all that. But there are things that government should be doing: paving roads, bridges, our defense, education. There are things that should be done. But there's this frame out there, Donald, and you know this as well as anyone, that the private sector always does things more efficiently, more cheaply, better, and somehow the public sector doesn't. And yet, example after example of the private sector screwing us over never seems to get the attention that it should.
Well, it's also what you said, though, it's actually false. I mean, we have to prove it, so we're myth busting because, again, everybody believes that it's cheaper, better, faster. But it's not. They say things are, business is more efficient. And, in the work that I do in fighting privatization and different, all around the country, it's, okay, that means they're saying they can do it cheaper. Okay. tell us what you're going to spend less money on. Because it's actually just sort of a finite, list of things that they can do. They can have fewer workers. They can pay their workers less, which of course they do. They can have crappier equipment or crappier supplies because, there's all that money that's got to go for returns to investors and executive compensation packages. So it's actually not true that they're more efficient. They just have figured out a way to extract resources from the public, which means extracting from the public means every one of those dollars that goes to a CEO's salary or profit is a dollar not going into public service.
Exactly. And, I look at, the Indiana Turnpike as one of those examples. The private firm took it over and they basically just ran it into the ground. And that's where they made their money off of. And, over the time, you ended up seeing that the state ended up getting back a resource that wasn't what they gave over. It didn't produce the revenue that they were told. And it was just a screw job all the way around. And yet we keep falling into these kind of things.
Well, in that particular case, the state didn't get it back. The state had the power to get it back, but you may remember Governor Pence.
Right.
He decided, no, we're going to sell it again, even though they had the power to take it back. And in fact, 2 counties, public agencies said, we'll put together a bid. We think this ought to be a public, in the public control. And, Pence was a privatizer. He said, no, we're going to give it away.
And this is where,
I'll say the interesting thing, the important thing about the other thing that happened in Indiana when they sold their turnpike a number of years ago is because here's, the fine print that really gets us. There was a crisis, a flooding in Indiana at some point. I can't remember exactly when it happened. The governor at the time said, okay, we're going to open the toll lanes. We're going to just let people out because we want to evacuate. The company at the time, I think it was Macquarie, sent him a bill. Okay, so we lost revenue. Now, you never want a governor thinking, oh, my God, can I afford to save lives? You just, that shouldn't be part of the calculation. And the private company shouldn't have control over whether we do that or not.
Yeah, no, that's, and it's not just the roads, like in places where they've privatized their parking garages and their parking systems. If you want to have a parade, if you want to do something, for emergencies, anything, you've got to pay those parking meters, for as long as they're used. And it's right there in the contract because those companies don't write things to get poor. They write things to make money.
Well, in that case, Chicago did that for 75 years. It's worse than what you say. Because if the city wants to eliminate spots permanently for a bike lane or a bus, dedicated bus line or something else, they got to buy the spots back for the calculated future value of that spot. They don't do it. It's nuts. They get control of our stuff and they hold on to it.
It's crazy times. But again, this is one of those things where, the education process of what privatization has brought us, of what handing over what used to be public space and the common good and the public good has turned into, the profiteers will do it. And every time you turn around, you're reaching into your pocket. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show here with Donald Cohen. Donald's written the book, The Privatization of Everything, How the Plunder of Public Goods Transformed America and How We Can Fight Back. We'll get links out on social media how you can take a look at the book. If you've got a question, comment, something on your mind for Donald, give us a call, 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425. Let's go to the phone lines and get one thing that I what is that? Is that Stephen you said? Let's get Stephen on line 3. Stephen, how are we doing today?
I'm good. How about yourself, sir?
Good. You got a question for Donald?
Hold on one second. I'm sorry. My service is bad. I'm in the UP of Michigan. I have a question for
Go ahead.
Are you guys against the privatization of the education system, like far as having private schools and private universities, or what are your thoughts on that?
But let's separate them. Let's separate K-12 to higher ed, right? There's difference. So K-12, yes, we're opposed to the privatization of public education through school vouchers and to a great extent through school vouchers. I mean, there are school charters. Charter schools. I mean, there are good charter schools and there are bad charter schools, just like everything else. But the growth of charters is creating a parallel system based on the market, where folks are competing against schools are competing against each other, and we very much oppose that. higher ed, now there's public universities and there are private universities. Harvard's a private university, not against Harvard, but but the issue more is the for-profit colleges that really are, they're really call centers because they're just trying to bring in as many people as possible and make as much money as possible. And clearly the record shows provide not, really high quality education. Now, I have family members who've gone to them. People go, they get it, but they end up in massive amounts of debt.
That answer your question, Stephen?
Yeah. I was just wondering why is competition between schools a bad thing necessarily?
There's an interesting question for you, Donald. Go ahead. The competition question that I love getting thrown out at. Why is competition bad?
It's really competition is in many ways a good thing. We all compete. We watch the Olympics. Creates good things. In public goods, public services, and I'll specifically talk about education. Here's the problem, and I'll use it in the sense of I'll describe charter schools. I'll use that as an example. So charter schools were originally created, and they're all over the country, to create, little laboratories of innovation, reduce the rules and sort of let them go, and teachers and parents and kids, figure something out, and then come up with new ideas and then share those ideas so that every student in them, can benefit. It's sort of a lab, an R&D lab. But what's happened, but that's not how it turned out. So now the charter schools, here's how it works. A charter school will compete against district neighborhood schools for enrollment and the dollars that come with the kid. So here's what the competition has stimulated, has created. There are schools, because they're competing now, they have to show good numbers to get more enrollment. There are schools that have figured out ways to get rid of, they're not legally allowed to do this, but it's hard to prove, to get rid of expensive kids, hard to educate kids, behaviorally challenged kids, special ed kids that would bring their numbers down, bring their test scores down. So they get rid of them, they push them out. Or before that, they actually figure out creative ways to... Say it again.
What was that? I think he's fallen off. But to your point, and this is where
So and I'll say one other point there. So they're competing, and they are kids are getting pushed out. It's working against families. The idea behind competition in schools is that the good ones will succeed and the poor ones will fail.
Right.
Right. So or improve. But what happens is the schools that need improvement get bled of dollars because the kids are going elsewhere, so they have no money to improve. And by the way, it's disruptive to families. It divides communities. It's just bad. The other piece of this is charter schools, given that they're publicly funded and privately operated. Remember, they're supposed to share. They make their teachers sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, to prevent them from sharing trade secrets.
Right.
And what are those trade secrets? Lesson plans. Right. So that's the problem. I don't know if he's still on the phone, but that's the problem with competition in education.
No, and this is where I've said from the longest time, the profit motive schools, the ones who are making money off of this, it's in their interest to do what's called creaming. You want the best students you can possibly get. We get rid of, as you pointed out, all the trouble kids, all the kids who have behavioral problems, all the kids who have learning disabilities, all that. We kick them to the curb, and you get just the best students. And the weird thing is there was a study on this from Stanford University that said even in that environment, these charter schools don't do any better on the aggregate than the public schools do. So why are we doing this? For me, instead of creating parallel school districts, we should be working to improve the one we have with all of the resources we can, instead of splitting them and dividing them and creating this environment where the profiteers are able to what's the word that they use? Proprietary software and proprietary curriculum, so that what was supposed to be best practices shared across the school districts is now something with a profit motive. It's crazy stuff, Donna. And again, cyber charters are 1,000 times worse than the brick and mortar charters.
That's right. And by the way, the curriculum and the lesson plans that they are now calling a trade secret, we paid for them. We paid for every, they should be public. Absolutely.
No, it's crazy stuff. But here again, this is another one of those things that we've been told repetitively, Don, that, competition. That's going to solve all of our problems. We're going to get the two public schools who are underfunded, and they're going to compete against each other. You're going to have the kids who are coming to school hungry with the problems at home and all of this stuff. And somehow, by starving both of them, somehow they're eventually going to pull themselves up and do better. And it's a false setup, and one that's designed to fail to move us towards privatization.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's exactly what's happening. And, think about competition. Businesses, your businesses competing for public things. They compete for the cheapest ones to serve. They don't sell, they don't want to serve people who don't bring in revenue for them. That's not how you deliver a public good or a public service to everybody, to everyone, which is really what we need to do.
Yeah, the book, The Privatization of Everything, how the plunder of public goods transformed America and how we can fight back. So the part of this that I find interesting is, how do we fight back? I mean, this has been 40 years of neoliberalism, 40 years of supply-side voodoo Reaganomics, 40 years of Chicago school economics that have pushed us into this world where everything has to be done with a profit motive at heart. Everything has to be done in the private sector. How do we claim some of this stuff back after having been robbed and plundered? How do we do that?
Well, the first thing to remember, Rick, is that it's not going to happen tomorrow. They played the long game. We have to realize that this is going to take concerted effort over time with many hands, with many voices, all that. So it's, we're always looking for the quick fix, and it isn't going to happen. But there's, I would say there's a few things. Positive elements of public services and things are, and goods are all around us every day. We don't think about them. You turn on the tap, the water comes out. Now, not in every place. That's not true in Lent. The water came out, but it wasn't good water. But the paint on our walls used to have lead in it. It no longer does because of government action. So there's actually quite a bit of government around us that government action around us is actually pretty good, and we need to start talking about that. Yeah. I think that's really important. But then that's not enough to do. We also have to say what the public purpose of those things are, right? Because we also have to build a new ethic. We have to say we're not on our own. We actually are interdependent. Not because it feels good, but because it's actually true. Through COVID, if it's not clear now, at least to many of us, that the health of all of us depends on the health of each of us. I don't know what we'll get through. That every kid needing to be educated serves us all,
right? Not
just the kid, not just that family. So there's a sort of a set of beliefs and values that need to kind of come forth in a really powerful way.
Again, the book, The Privatization of Everything. How the plunder of public goods transformed America and how we fight back, written by Donald Cohen. We'll get links out on social media how you can pick up this book. I highly suggest it. Lots of good stuff in there, and lots of how we can, again, reclaim the public commons and begin to move in a better direction. Donald, I appreciate the work that you do. I appreciate the book, and I hope you'll come back and talk to us again real soon.
You bet. Anytime.
Good stuff, Donald Cohen. And no, seriously, I mean, at the end of this, when you look at the things that we've handed off to private interests, to corporate America, there's a serious problem going on. And we most certainly need to reclaim our commons. And look, there are example after example, whether it's water, whether it's parking, of we the people and the taxpayer getting screwed over. We're not just consumers, we're citizens. I'd love to hear your thoughts right back after this. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show. For working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1941. That was the day 18 supporters of the Socialist Workers' Party were sentenced in the first Smith Act trial. Earlier that summer, 29 militants had been targeted and arrested for their leadership of the events in Minneapolis during the 1930s. They led the 1934 Teamsters strike that made Minneapolis a union town, successfully confronted the fascist silver shirts in 1938, and led a WPA strike strike the following year. By 1941, federal agents were raiding SWP offices in Minneapolis and St. Paul, seizing boxes of documents, books, pamphlets, and other materials. The prosecution alleged the 29 had conspired to advocate the violent overthrow of the federal government. The defendants insisted that advocating class struggle to achieve a peaceful transition to socialism was not the equivalent of a violent overthrow. They added the trial was a government witch hunt bent on suppressing their First Amendment rights. 6 were released, another 5 were acquitted, but the remaining 18 were sentenced to between 12 and 16 months in jail. Dozens of CIO unions, including the UAW, the USWA, the URW, and the UE, all rallied to the defense of the convicted militants. The ACLU, central in the defense case, now mounted the appeals campaign. They failed to overturn the convictions, and the 18 surrendered to authorities 2 years later to begin serving their sentences. For historian Donna Haverty-Stack, the case showed how far the Roosevelt administration went to prosecute political dissent, even to the point of targeting the labor liberal left. The act would be repealed in 1952. And hundreds of convictions under the act would finally be reversed as unconstitutional by 1957.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425. You got a question, comment, thought, want to hear it. On the privatization of school things, and it's something that, over the years, especially where I'm at in Pennsylvania, has just been a total disaster. You go into Philadelphia where some of these charter schools have popped up. There was the one that served as charter school by day, strip club at night. There was the cyber charter school that promised that they would give, computers and internet access and, printers and scanners and all the things that kids were going to need to be able to do the online education, internet access, all of that, and gave them nothing and just pocketed the money. There's all of this grift that's in there and all of this theft and all of these crimes. And you go, all this wasted money, and you go, that's one part of it. But the wasted opportunity, because it took them a couple of years to catch up with this group. So you have these 52 kids who, for 2 years lost an education. They were just being passed through as if they were achieving, and they weren't. And you go, well, we deal with those criminals. This is what happens in a broken system. Now, look, does our public school system have problems? Yeah. We need to get in and fix those places that have problems. And oddly enough, the places that have problems are the ones that are the most underfunded. Pennsylvania was one of the worst places in the country for the unequal distribution of funds that go into poor schools. I'm not a supporter of privatizing K through 12 education. I think it should be in the hands of we the people. And this is where, at the end of the day, what we've seen in the past, the kind of behavior from these companies that each kid is a profit motive, is that they do the creaming, they do the getting rid of people before the tests come around, and they dump them back into the public schools. So where all that's going to be left eventually, and the goal, this is where the goal is, eventually where all that's left is the public schools is a dumping ground for the students that these profiteers couldn't make money off of. And that's a problem. And then there's the other part that nobody ever talks about, and that's the curriculum. All their proprietary software and all their books and all the money that they make off that, the land grab that comes with it, because they always want buildings and property, and then let's not forget all of the services that come around. We see stories here in Pennsylvania all the time of, the brother-in-law of the guy who runs the school got these sweetheart contracts. And you go, but Rick, that stuff happens in the public schools. No, not as often, because there are people paying attention. There's a school board paying attention. That's my problem with the charter schools. Now, originally, I was in favor of the charter schools. I love the idea of trying to do things differently. I love the idea of saying, hey, not all kids learn the same way. I personally am an experiential learner. If I can get my hands on it, I can wrap my fingers around it, I can dig into it, I do much better than sitting and listening to lectures. to listening to people drone on. Now, I know people, my wife, for instance, can sit and listen to someone give a lecture and walk out and tell you exactly what it was about. I don't have that kind of ability. And this is where I think, education does need to make some adjustments. There are some kids who thrive in an online kind of world. I'm okay with that. But it shouldn't be in a profit motive system. Charter schools were never meant to be handed off to someone else. They were meant to be part of the public school system. And I'm a big proponent of the public schools. It's that simple. Now, you want to send your kid to private school? You do that. That is fantastic. Do what you got to do. But at the end of the day, we need to strengthen our public schools. And we need teachers who are going to have the ability to be able to teach and use the skills that they've honed in years of training. And we need to respect them. I mean, this assault on educators is just nuts. But look, education isn't the only thing that they're trying to profitize. And understand, in where I'm at, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Education is. So for me, that's part of it. Let's see what we got going on the phones. We got Mark in Illinois on line 1. Mark, how are we doing tonight?
Oh, doing good.
What's on your mind?
Oh, well, I was just thinking about the district. Like, how would you personally distribute food between the masses?
Wow. How big of a scale are we talking about here?
Oh, well, I mean, like, you can go from federal or something like that if you think, but like, just however you prefer, really.
I got to tell you, I'd have to spend some time thinking about that. That is a huge undertaking. I grew up in an era where, there was a lot of government cheese and rice being handed out at the local rec center or the local church or whatever, which I never thought was all that efficient. I'm curious, what's the problem you're seeing?
Yeah, I think, like, one of the main issues, though, is that you have these, like, fat fucking retards.
All right, there you go. I love when people with small brains and no IQ, I give them time to say dumb stuff like that. Hey, thanks, Mark, doing Illinois proud, and thanks for swearing on air. Very good for you. Those are the kind of people you'd like to see in an alley one day. And give them a what's for, because evidently their mother didn't teach them very well. Let's go to line 3. We've got Matt in New Mexico. Matt, what's on your mind?
Nothing. No, I was just listening to your views about education. I want to know how you felt about, like, obesity rate.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate your call, buddy. You have a great night. Because that's not an education issue, but good for you. Again, on the education front, and I've said this a bunch of times, we do need to get folks educated. And I guess, Matt in New Mexico needs to go back to school and learn something. That's funny. Thanks for that, though. No, but here's the great part of this. And you have folks who, they're not smart enough when they're getting ripped off. You look at the privatization that's happened in this country. I look at Pittsburgh, for instance, who privatized their parking garages. Chicago, another perfect example. They privatized their parking garages, and what we end up with is a system where corporate America does better. And they're doing better on purpose. And we, the people, end up getting shortchanged. So if you wanted to distribute food better, so low-income folks could have food on the table, you would have a tax base to do that. We don't. If you wanted an education system that met the needs of poor and working class folks, we would have the resources to do it. Sadly, we don't. Let's give Rick in Minneapolis a shot here. Rick, you got to do a better job of this. Rick, what's on your mind? Rick, you there?
Hey, yeah, I'm here. I was asking about what are y'all doing with all this, all these multiple school bathroom issues that we have to have. It seems like we have to have, I don't know if it's 2 or 3. It's so confusing how many bathrooms we're supposed to have nowadays.
Yeah, not an issue I care all that much about. The answer to this has always been we just have private bathrooms for people. In the past years, we've dealt with this problem. This is a problem that I don't think is a big deal. If someone doesn't identify as male or female, there should be somewhere for them to go. Going to the bathroom shouldn't be a hot button political issue, in my view.
Yeah, maybe in the old days, where they used to, I don't know. In the old days, you used to have like 4 different bathrooms because the whites and the blacks had to separate. Okay. I guess now we have to do all sorts of other things going on.
All right. Well, I appreciate that one too. Thanks, buddy. This is why I love live radio, because you never know what you're going to get. Let's go. We've got, what is this, Alice on line 2. Alice, how are we doing tonight?
I'm doing fine. I thought I'd call in after the couple other calls, but you were saying about, at the beginning of the show, about stories that your grandparents had told you about the attack of Pearl Harbor. And I had a little funny story that I thought I'd share that happened 2 weeks afterwards.
Okay.
With my grandparents. I was raised on a farm, and my parents had just bought the farm, and my mom's youngest brother was staying there with them, and my dad and he were both working in the coal mines. And about 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor, and then Germany had declared war, my grandmother had spent the entire summer canning things. Well, there were also some hop vines, and my dad and my uncle thought that they would make some homemade beer. And about 3 o'clock in the morning one night, there was this god-awful racket going on, and my uncle jumped out of bed, and he said, "Oh, my God, the Germans are attacking us." And everybody woke up, and everybody was running around, and my dad and my uncle grabbed the guns, and they were telling my mother, "Take the baby and hide in the basement." And she opened the basement door, and here, the beer that they had put in the bottles down there, the first time they'd ever decided to make homemade beer, well, it didn't go real well. One exploded, set off a chain reaction, and there was a mess. My mother was ready to kill them all. All the canned stuff was just busted open, and my dad and my uncle both said years later that they actually wished it would have been the Germans, because my mother was ready to kill them all.
You don't want to make Mama unhappy. That's the first. No, the first rule every man needs to learn.
But it was a story that was actually handed down. They would tell this story at all the family reunions when they would bring up talking about World War II. So I just thought I'd share it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Finally, something reasonable.
Okay. Have a good night.
Thanks, Alice. Appreciate it. That's an interesting story. I mean, you go back to some of those stories that my grandparents told. I still remember, they've been gone for several years, but you think about that generation and, some of the stories that came out of their generation, how they united. They united around their moment. And some people call them the greatest generation. And I used to fight back against that because, it was a moment that they had to rise to the occasion to defeat. And they did that. They rose to the occasion. And I now look back at it and I go, yeah, they were the greatest generation, because even with all of their divides and all of the problems that they had, they did come together. Because I look at right now where we are, we haven't risen to our moment. We haven't risen to the challenges of this time. And we're not uniting. We're actually pulling further apart. And that's a problem. Problem for democracy. It's a problem for our country. Especially as you look around the globe, the Chinese, the Russians becoming much more muscular, much more, willing to take things on. There are problems, and you get, the brain dead, who, they've got their comments. Sad times, and yet the reality is we're not moving forward as a country. The prosperity that our grandparents' generation built for their children, can we look ourselves in the mirror and say we're doing that for ours? Or can we literally look in the mirror and say, yeah, we're going to leave this a better place for our kids than was left to us? I don't think so. And this is the frustration of the moment that I'm in, and this kind of discussion, because politically we can't seem to agree. With people who disagree on a pathway forward. And that's a problem. I guess I'm old enough to remember that there were times where you disagreed with people, and they actually had an honest argument, a cogent argument against whatever you were talking about. Look, if you're in favor of privatization, explain to me why. I get the argument. The argument is that private entities are going to be more efficient, and that's proved to be not true. They're more efficient at pulling profit out of whatever they're doing, but they're not more efficient at providing what we need. And you can look at the turnpikes that have been privatized. You can look at the parking system, the water systems. You can look at all of this stuff that's going on and go, no, it's just not the reality. And that's the problem. Let's go to I guess Matt has moved. Let's check if Matt moved to New Jersey. Matt, what's on your mind, man?
Well, I'm originally from New Jersey.
Yeah, okay. Originally from New Jersey. Well, I appreciate the call, buddy. Maybe when you move back to New Jersey, we'll go back then. Thanks so much. No, but ultimately, if we get into a place where you go, look, I believe in privatization. I want to know why. I know people who live like in South Carolina, for instance. Every time they cross the street, they're digging into their pocket because some private entity owns what it is that they're trying to get to. Is this the world that we want to? Is this the world we want to live in? We're going to try one more. We're going to try, what is it? Joby from, New York? Hey, Joby, how are you today?
Yeah, my name is Joby. I'm from up New York. I live in the Brooklyn area. I'm pretty concerned because I got a kid. The kid's mixed right now. Kind of like three different races. He's part Mexican, part Asian, part black, and he's a little confused. And the other thing that is kind of annoying me right now is I don't like how we're integrating the transgender people into the locker rooms and not teaching students how to identify that it's okay to teach 5-year-olds that it's okay to have them identify with the opposite gender. Can you please, how do I talk to my kid? He's already having an issue trying to identify with which race, and now he's having trouble he's literally putting my wife's lipstick on. What do I do?
I don't believe you, and that's one of these problems that I have with some of this stuff. I'm not buying it, but hey, nice try. Now look, if that is seriously a problem, there are health officials that can help you with that. I don't know why you'd be calling a talk radio program to ask somebody about that, other than you're just being a wise guy. But hey, this is why I leave my direct messages open, and it's the reason that I like having people call in, because you do get the guy who's trying out to be a comedian, and this is it. Yeah, 5-year-old in Brooklyn. Yeah. I gotta wonder which locker room that you're putting this kid in. Yeah, look, this is part of the entertainment and the enjoyment of these moments. I find it quite comical, because the sad reality is it shows that maybe we do need to privatize our education system, because some people are failing badly at it. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break here in a minute. When we come back, our good friend Bob Ney is going to be here to share some top stories of the day, and maybe we'll take a laughter break to get out of this experiment of pulling in the folks from New Jersey and New Mexico. Maybe there's something going on. Maybe there's something in the water, the privatized water that we've put out there. Bizarre stuff. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. Quick break. Right back with Bob Ney. Stick around. Right back after this. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1886.
That was the day 38 tradesmen met in Columbus, Ohio, to found the American Federation of Labor. There was an urgent need to form a new national organization for skilled workers. The Knights of Labor had organized workers regardless of skill. They included women and African Americans among their ranks. But they were rocked by a sharp and swift decline that year. There was an anti-labor backlash after the Haymarket incident the previous spring. Many tradesmen were looking to form a different kind of federation than the Knights had offered. Julie Green, author of Pure and Simple Politics, states the new AFL differed from the Knights of Labor on three core issues. First, these trade unionists were less concerned with the broad social reforms the Knights promoted. Instead, they wanted to work toward the economic concerns of their members. They didn't like the mixed assemblies the Knights insisted upon, which often included non-workers. Second, the craftsmen hoped for full autonomy of the trade unions within a loose federation. They didn't like the centralized structure of the Knights and the dominant role Terence Powderly played. Finally, they didn't like the jurisdictional subordination the Knights subjected the trade unions to. They elected Samuel Gompers of the Cigar Makers International Union as their first president, who served until his death in 1924. The early AFL reflected many of the Knights' traditions, including industrial unions and socialist politics. They fought for injunction reform and the 8-hour day. Within 15 years, the AFL would grow to represent millions in predominantly white, skilled craft unions that embodied business unionism. In 1935, the demands for industrial organizing would split the House of Labor and the AFL.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I love doing live radio because the lonely people who don't have dates are the ones who feel like they need to try and entertain themselves. Appreciate it. Thanks. Hey, some good news. Nothing says Christmas like guns around a Christmas tree. First, you saw Kentucky Representative Thomas Massey and his brood, and now Lauren Boebert and her spawn have taken up arms around the tree. The difference is I was looking at the Boebert picture. Her kids don't look as thrilled about being used as a prop for mom's psychophallic fetish. So I just, we'll see how they turn out. Going to be kind of interesting, given the fact that I think she's kind of off the deep end. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the top stories of the day, our good friend, former Ohio Congressman and political analyst Bob Ney. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Hello, Rick. How are you?
So, did you ever take a picture around the Christmas tree, holding a gun? When you were in office, was that what you sent out to your constituents?
I mean, let me just put it this way: if the election were tied and the county that decides had a high NRA registration, I'll stop right there. Okay. No, I didn't. To answer your question.
Look, maybe that's the thing.
Look, if the election were close in Belmont County, I would have put, former member AFL-CIO Flint Workers Glass Workers Union.
Yeah.
I would have put that under the tree. Okay.
Yeah, it's something.
Because I was a member.
I'm looking at these Christmas cards going, this, I don't know.
I saw that.
Would Jesus be packing? Am I missing something?
I mean, I know. I'm looking at that. I'm just looking at it. I don't know. Where does that come from, huh?
Bizarre stuff. Let's get to the top story. Evidently, the Senate voted 52-48. Manchin and Tester, I guess, voted with the Republicans to stop the vaccine mandate. This doesn't really mean anything. It's not going to pass the House, and even if it did, Biden would veto it. But what do you think of this? What's this going to mean?
Let me go to the process, if I could, for a second. What's it going to mean? Again, it's a symbolic win for the Republicans, okay? And two of the Democrats, of course, as you say, Tester and Manchin went with it. Let me just say something about the process for a second. This should stand out glaringly, Rick. The resolution, was a special resolution, a discharge resolution in the House could make this happen. You'd have to have over 218 members, sign it. But they've got this whole process. All of a sudden they said, oh, okay, we can now do this resolution, which needs simple majority. And then, of course, if you want to do something that goes back to simple majority 3 times in your Senate lifetime a year, you can do reconciliation as long as the Senate parliamentarian tells you can do that. Otherwise, you go back to the cloture vote, which is, not a simple majority. It just shows the idiocy of the Senate rules system.
Yeah, it's
idiocy.
It's crazy what's going on, and
I'm not calling them idiots. I won't do that. That's
no.
crass. But the system is idiotic.
But here's where I'm at in this now. I'm going. It's clear that through our government, we're not going to be able to do anything on the vaccine front. Can promote it. Want to encourage people to do it, but the mandate's not going to go anywhere. The court's not going to let it go anywhere, and you're going to end up causing massive chaos in certain places. I've been coming back to the reality that this is what capitalism is going to figure it out. Insurance rates are going to go up. There are going to be things that happen, and that's just how we're going to have to deal with it.
Well, yeah, and I'm sorry I got off, instead of the substance, I got off on the process. But it's just so frustrating to see them pick and choose when they want to do something about something. That just, got me so off today in the wrong direction. But yes, as far as the substance of it, it's very clear they can't even have something to try to make the federally the workplace safer. In Ohio, vast majority of healthcare workers aren't going to get vaccinated, with all the elderly there, the vulnerable elderly, and so. Yes, the end result, you're right. Capitalism will have to work it out when you have lawsuits that will be all over the place. If you're in a company and the company didn't have people vaccinated and you get COVID, maybe you'll sue the company. I don't know. You're right.
File a workers' comp claim.
Right. Maybe capitalism eventually will work it out. But I just, saw this and I'm thinking, where do we go with it? Especially, again, in certain fields, in particular, healthcare, just to give a good example.
No, I mean, look, I got a relative who, whining and complaining. His insurance rates went up $1,500, and they told him it's because you're not vaccinated. You get vaccinated, it'll be back down where it was.
Right.
This is how it's going to have to work out. I mean, because we're evidently not smart enough, because all of the information's there. The majority of the people who are dying right now are people who aren't vaccinated, and I'm okay losing them. The Trump voter counties, where they overwhelmingly voted for Trump, they're dying at 3 times the rate as everyone else. And maybe that's how we thin the herd and we get rid of the people who aren't smart enough to put a sentence together.
Mm-hmm. Well, I had a person who was doing some work for me today on a flip, and he was complaining that he had to go get a COVID test. Well, he's not vaccinated, and then he was sick for a day, so the company said, you have to go get a COVID test, And, of course, if they have to pay for it, are they going to then say, well, I shouldn't have to pay for it? All of these are going to arise in the work settings, and it's going to, maybe with Omicron, just get particularly worse.
Yeah, well, we'll see where it takes us, because we're creeping up to that 800,000 number.
Right.
I wanted to get
now,
your thoughts.
Also, requirements and mandates are in the eye of the beholder. If you want to get on an airplane and you want to leave the United States, or if you're an American and you get on an airplane and want to come here, you will either be vaccinated or be tested, prior to it, or you're not going to get on the plane.
Right.
That may eventually happen in a domestic setting. So that may take care of those who want to fly. Certain places, if you want to get into a concert, again, you make a point about, capitalism, and so maybe eventually certain events will, force more people to have the vaccination.
Well, there it is. Let's talk about the debt ceiling. Evidently, the House passed an approval. They fast-tracked it through. It's going through to the Senate. Just needs 51 votes. Again, I hate talking about this because it seems kind of stupid, but at some point, do we not just get rid of this damn thing?
Well, again, here we go. Just what I said on the other issue. Let's look at the substance of the debt ceiling. You and I have beaten this horse, we might as well beat it one more time because it's worth it. People that are complaining, Republicans, about the debt ceiling increase have already supported continuing resolutions of spending because they're not budgets. They've done that already. So there's no reason not to do this. As you know, I called it the yawn vote when I was in Congress. You know, oh, there's a debt ceiling. A couple of people say things. You stick your voting card in the machine, you vote, you yawn, and you go to dinner. You know, when Bush was president, I called it the yawn vote. It's become the do-all vote now, you know, the do-or-die vote. And so, again, you know, they've got this process they've set up. Okay, so the Republicans are going to yield to let the Democrats do it, you know, with raising the debt ceiling. And it was done away with under Trump. I mean, that's the other thing. It was just they said, okay, well, we're not going to do it for a couple of years. And a lot of people don't realize that, Rick.
Yeah.
Under the Trump administration, it was basically suspended. They didn't have to go vote for a couple of years. So, yes, they could do away with it.
Yeah, it's crazy.
The real debt ceiling, the real nature of the debt ceiling, Rick, is in the budget process. And if they go back to true budget processes, then they don't have a debt ceiling vote because they figure it out in all the appropriation bills, covering all the agencies, allowing all the amendments to be done in a real fair, open process.
But at least we're not shutting things down just before Christmas.
Right.
Maybe we're going to get out of this. But hey, next year, early next year, we can have the same ticking bomb coming around as well.
Here's where they all share an interest. And this is what, you know, the Republicans aren't voting for this, but guess what? They're allowing it to happen, all right, without basically, you know, supporting it. So what's going to happen is kicks it into February. And then they're going to be in an election year. And at that point in time, the Republicans won't dare play chicken. And they'll work definitely something out that takes them up, shall we say, past the election.
Yeah, well, no, it's predictable. I mean, it's what they've done in the past. So just look to what where they've been and what they've done before, and it'll get us there. I wanted to get your thoughts on Mark Meadows evidently suing the January 6th commission because evidently he believes that they weren't gonna respect his boundaries.
Well, let's look at something on lawsuits. I was sued many, many, many times. Many members of Congress are sued. It happens. Somebody sued me once over having to have an Ohio driver's license, right? Don't ask me why, because it's not a federal license. And those requirements, if you look at members of Congress when they're sued, and there's a reason you really can't sue a member of Congress unless it's on a personal basis. And what they do, the House lawyers come to you and say, you're required to answer the court by saying your name is Robert Ney and here's your address. That's what you're required. And then they quash it. You know, they stop it. I was sued on an election issue one time in Ohio. Same thing happens. So let's go to the real truth of this. Meadows cannot sue members of that committee. He's doing it, but he technically can't. You can't. If you ever start allowing for members of Congress to be sued for doing their job, the members sitting on that committee, if that would ever happen, just forget any member of Congress being able to ever vote on anything. You can't be sued for official congressional actions unless it's of a criminal nature.
Right.
So this whole suit is nonsense, but guess what? It's a legal way for Meadows to get it into court, to eventually have it thrown out, but it does what they want to be done, which is to stall, to get some time behind all of this. And that's his objective. And
what's interesting is, they're all complaining over cell phone records. I mean, I listened to Marjorie Taylor Greene, to Boebert, to Meadows, all of these people. None of these people want us to know what they were doing on January 6th with their cell phones, their text messages, their phone calls, which leads me to this place of going, now I got to know what you were doing. What's in those communications? What did you do?
Right. And also, if they have something on the cell phone, on the records, within their cell phones that has nothing to do with January 6th, but is some type of other business of the House, then they have a system and a process to go through there to not have those cell phone conversations or records exposed. They have it. In the subpoena process, which I have been through, 200,000 subpoenas, where this electronic system goes through and says, here's the 12 subpoenas that you want to see to the United States government, right, to the Department of Justice. They have that way to protect their own personal, type of phone calls that have nothing to do with January the 6th. And so on that basis, they have nothing to fear unless they have something to fear.
Unless they have something to fear. And for me, that's part of this. Now, here's the thing. If they were smart, they would have deleted most of that stuff by now, which wouldn't that be an obstruction charge?
Yes, because once you're in the world of, the net, you're there forever. And yes, if they would delete those, they could be charged with obstruction.
So contempt, does he get contempt charges?
Well, I think so, because the Justice Department, again, yes, to answer your question, Rick, I think, yes, he gets them, because the Justice Department, in a kind of a rare moment, of course, went after Bannon and probably will go after Meadows. And again, I say a rare moment because in the past this was just kind of all nonsense, a dog and pony show. We're going to hold him in contempt, but it's not the same contempt as you and I or a person listening to your show would be held in. Now it's taken it to a different level by justice. So yes, he may, but you see, he's done the smokescreen counter lawsuit. Now technically, that lawsuit, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but the fact that members of Congress cannot be sued for official actions, that lawsuit should be just thrown out as we speak. But I think it could wind through the federal system. So yes, justice goes after him for contempt, then he goes after the committee for doing their job. So all he needs to do is stall this off, let's say, till June of an election year?
Yeah. Now, let's hope it doesn't take that long. Let's hope they throw this out and they get moving along and they do what they're claiming they're going to do. But, Bob, I appreciate the time. As always, good information.
Thank you, Rick.
Good stuff. Our good friend Bob Ney. And look, I'm hoping they throw him in jail. I hope they put him in the hot seat and make him look. All I wanted is to sit in the seat and plead the fifth. That's his right. But this idea that no, I'm not going to, and you're not going to make me, ridiculous. Because if it were you or me, we'd be in that seat. Now, do I want them to be able to get the information? I want to know what these criminals were doing on that day. If they broke the law, they're criminals. I want to know what the former guy did on January 6th. I want to know what these people who put our country in peril, I want to know what they did. I want to know what Marjorie Taylor Greene did. I want to know what Lauren Boebert did. I want to know what these people did as they're cheerleading a crowd into chaos. I most certainly want to know that. And I think the American people should want it. And look, if there's nothing there, there's nothing there. I'll be the first to say, well, they're not guilty. They're innocent. I don't have a problem with that. But here's the thing. There's so much there. The moneyed interest of this country, the well-organized, well-funded groups who went there to attack our democracy, went there with the express goal to stopping the certification of that election. You got to get to the bottom of it. We have been a country for over 200 years of peaceful transfer of power. And yet, this one, the former guy, pushed us where we are. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure you follow us on social media at Rick Smith Show on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all of those places. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.